Hello. So a while ago I discovered this goofy multiplayer pixel game, and after way too many hours of playing it, I thought to myself, hey, what if I tried to beat the hardest dungeons in the game completely alone? And the thing is that the game is designed to be played with a group of players, which means that some of these dungeons are gonna be really hard to solo. So I asked my friends if they thought I could do it, and yeah. And they're probably right in the way that it's not really worth the effort, but I am terribly stubborn, so I'm gonna do it anyway. But before going into the challenge, I'm assuming a lot of people don't know anything about this game, so let me quickly explain how it works. To explain it in simple words, this game is a bullet hell roguelike MMO. Okay, that might sound a bit confusing, but basically, bullet hell means that the core of the gameplay is to avoid a ton of projectiles, usually while fighting a boss. It's basically the same principle as Touhou, if you've heard of it, or maybe even Undertale to some extent. Roguelike means that if you die, well, you die. And MMO means that the game will slowly strip you away from any form of social life and eat hundreds of hours of your life until any enjoyment of the game is completely gone, but sunk cost fallacy still pushes you to keep playing anyway, despite the game only bringing you frustration and despair. Oh, and it also means you're playing with a bunch of people. And that's where we get into the challenge. Since it's a multiplayer game, the dungeons are designed to be completed with a group of people, especially the difficult ones. So completing them all by myself will definitely not be an easy task. Now, this is nothing unheard of, there's many players who've already achieved that, but there's two main differences between me and them. Firstly, they are much better at the game than I am. And secondly, we don't play the same class. You see, there's 18 different classes in this game. You could choose to play a mighty knight, able to survive almost any situation with his unparalleled defense. Or you could choose a powerful sorcerer, able to effortlessly breeze through waves and waves of enemies with his powerful magic. Or even a paladin, who has an ability that can make him invulnerable for a few seconds, allowing him to get out of tricky situations. Hey, this guy has a banjo. Alright, that's my main. Yeah, I picked Bard. Now, choosing a Bard, which is usually a supportive class in most games, for a challenge where I have to play solo might sound like a very dumb idea. And that's what my friends told me. But the cool thing with being able to buff your teammates is that you can also buff yourself, which genuinely makes this class pretty good in solo play as well. Anyway, now that we have our class ready, let's take a look at the dungeons we have to complete. There's 8 different stats in the game, and each stat has an endgame dungeon assigned to it. When you do these dungeons a specific amount of times, it gives you stat bonuses. For example, if you do a dungeon 5 times, you get 1 stat point, if you do it 15 times, you get 2 stat points, and so on. And if you do every dungeon 75 times, that means you have way too much free time, but you also get 5 points of each stat, a few extra bonuses, and most importantly, you get a cool skin. So I guess it's worth it? And I carefully stopped at 74 completions of each dungeon, so we can do the last one solo. So let's get going! The first dungeon in the list is the Cultist Hideout. And honestly, this thing is so easy that it's not even worth mentioning. There's 5 mini-bosses, and you just slowly kill them one by one until you win. The second dungeon in this list is the Nest, and this dungeon is not too hard either, but that's where the modifier system starts trolling a little bit. To keep it simple, dungeons have a chance to spawn with modifiers, and one of those modifiers is the Spider Swarm, which has a chance to summon a bunch of spiders whenever you kill mobs. The good thing is that they can drop health potions when they die, and the bad thing is that they can kill you. And this boss summons a lot of small mobs, so those spiders are gonna be a little bit annoying. In the first phase, the boss rotates around the room, and we just have to shoot it while killing the tons of spiders that spawn because of the modifier. which leaves the battlefield in a questionable state. Then the boss goes to the middle, and we just have to do some back and forth to dodge the projectiles and the lines of debuffing stars, and after a little bit of skill issue, we move on to the stinger phase, where we have to destroy those 3 big nests. And try to dodge these projectiles too, I guess. And in the last phase we have 3 extra bees rotating around the boss, and it might look a bit difficult, but honestly, you can mostly ignore them and just shoot the boss until it dies. Alright, that's 2 out of 8. The next ones in the list are the fungal and crystal caverns, and the first boss of these dungeons is this big worm. In the first phase we have to lure the worm around while shooting some parts of its body, and once we break enough of them, he starts speeding up. Then we have to shoot its body again while dodging these big circles of projectiles, and after a while he's going to spawn a head in the middle of the stage. Now this phase isn't too bad, we just circle around the head while micro-dodging the projectiles, but the hard part arrives now. The arena becomes smaller, leaving us less space to dodge, and the boss is going to spawn a nasty baby version of it, which shoots a big spiral of yellow projectiles, and dodging this on top of the attacks from the boss can be a little bit rough. Then we shoot the body of the worm a little bit more, and now the boss is going to speed up like crazy, making the fight a lot more dangerous. But after circling around the boss for a while, we bring it down to the final phase, where we just need to be careful to not get cornered against a wall, and after shooting a little bit more, we beat the boss, and we even drop a white bag. And now we move on to the second boss of the dungeon, the crystal entity. In this fight, the crystal will randomly choose between a bunch of mini-bosses, and we will have to fight them one by one, while being careful of this nasty crystal attack that can easily kill you. In this round, the first mini-boss was this weird-looking dino. And here, we just have to stay pretty close to the crystal and snipe the dinosaur, while being careful to not stay in the way of the fractal attack. Then the crystal becomes vulnerable, so we have to wiggle around those red attacks, while not running into the fractal if possible. And after a while the crystal summons a second mini-boss, the fish. And this one is pretty straightforward, we just have to keep moving so it doesn't sit on us while doing this attack, and after a bit of wiggling around the attacks, we kill the fish, hit the crystal, and move on to the hardest part of the fight. The last mini-boss is a big yellow dude that follows us around, and here we have to be careful, because if we stand too far, he's going to shoot blinding bombs, and if we stand too close, he can confuse us. So we want to keep a reasonable distance without going too far, and all of that while dodging the whip attack and the projectiles from the boss. And here, it's hard to focus on both the mini-boss and look at where the crystal shoots the fractal attack. So we're going to drag the mini-boss around the corners of the room, which are relatively safe from the fractal. And after cautiously dragging this big boy around the room, we move on to the final phase, where we just have to finish off the crystal while micro-dodging all of this stuff on the screen. Alright, 5 more to go. And before moving on to the really difficult ones, we have a final relatively easy dungeon, the Cockbolt Steamworks. Now, I lost the original recording of this run, so I had to hop back on the game to record a second solo run, so don't be confused if you see some elements at a higher level than in the rest of the video. Anyway, before fighting the real boss, we have a small mini-boss, and honestly, it's pretty easy. We can just rotate around the arena with him to deal most of the damage, and we can even cheese the end of the fight by going outside of the room, so it was nothing too bad. And then we reach the real boss. Throughout the whole fight, we will have to destroy 4 shield turrets scattered around the arena, and once those are broken, we can damage the boss until it goes to the next phase. And talking about the next phase, the boss spawns a conveyor belt that constantly pushes us backwards, so we'll have to tap up throughout the whole phase, which looks a bit goofy, but it's not too hard. And after that, he's going to transform into a big robot, with much more dangerous phases, like the infamous minefield. But thankfully, we didn't get that phase. We start with Sawblade, which fills up the map with a bunch of conveyor belts in every direction, and we have to escape the boss while not getting confused with the belts, and not getting hit by those blades that can quickly deal a lot of damage. Then we have a phase with a ton of crushing blocks around the whole stage, and despite how dramatic the animation looks, they really don't deal that much damage, and they're very easy to dodge, so the only thing we have to be careful of here are these big lines of red needles that the boss shoots, because they can quickly add up to a ton of damage. Then the boss transforms again into a dragon this time, and while we got lucky with the robot and didn't get minefield, we didn't get so lucky with the dragon and got one of the hardest phases of the dungeon, Draconic Fury. And I think the reason why it's hard is pretty self-explanatory. We have projectiles coming from everywhere here. A spiral of flames coming from the middle, a bunch of slashes from the rotating turrets, and even the dragon itself is shooting a bunch of fireballs. So first, we carefully rotate around the room to destroy all of the shields, and then we have to rotate with the boss to deal damage to it, adding another layer of difficulty since we also need to keep track of the boss and aim at him while desperately trying to dodge the billion of projectiles coming our way. So after running into a few difficulties... Okay, I'm out. We finally managed to push the boss to its last phase, Energy Storm. And while this phase looks pretty hard, it's honestly nothing too bad. We have to dodge this rain of projectiles, but since we're permanently slowed, it actually makes it easier to dodge, and it's okay if we have to tank a few hits anyway. The only danger here is the laser, which can almost instantly kill you, but it's fairly easy to avoid, so after shooting at the boss a little bit more, we beat the dragon and finish the dungeon. Well, we're already halfway through. But as I said earlier, this is where the real challenge begins. The dungeons we have left are Oryx 3, which is more or less the final boss of the game, the Shatters, which is arguably the hardest dungeon in the game, and the Void, which is specifically designed to be played with a group of at least 4 people, making it probably the hardest one to solo. So while I did the first 4 dungeons in just a few days, I think the next ones are going to take me a little bit more time. Okay, after a little bit of practice, we're ready to head to the Oryx Sanctuary. But before fighting the big boss, we will first have to fight a mini-boss, and we will randomly get one of 4 different mini-bosses, so let's take a look at each of them. The first one is Beza, which is the easiest one of the 4. You kinda just have to rotate around him, and sometimes you might get into a tight situation, but it's not too hard to get out of it. The second one is Dama, which is my favorite one of the 4. But I only got him once, and I died to a phase transition like an idiot, so I can't say much about him. The third one is Gemsbok, which in my opinion is the hardest one to solo. The whole arena is filled with pet stasis shots, preventing you from healing efficiently, and on top of that, the boss is constantly bombarding you with debuffing explosions, which makes the fight very hard to sustain. And finally, we have Locorix, and this is the boss I ended up having to fight on my final run, so we will go into a bit more detail here. The first phase is not too bad. He can do a shuriken attack, where we just move back and forth to avoid them, a rain of carrots, where we just zigzag between the cones, a boomerang attack, where we just have to be careful when the boomerang comes back, and for the next attack we have a safe spot in the middle, making it very easy to avoid. We also have to kill these big spheres that move towards the boss, because if it touches the boss, it's going to trigger a special attack, which can be a bit annoying. After that, the boss will move to the middle, and here we just have to slowly rotate back and forth while hitting the boss, and we try to hit the big spheres with our piercing shots on the way. Then the boss moves on to his second state, and here he is going to do enhanced attack. The falling carrots are still nothing too bad, but where it gets a lot tougher is on this attack, because the safe spot in the middle is a lot smaller, and they deal a lot of damage, which led to a few close calls. Then we have a bit more boomerang attacks, and here we fail to kill the sphere before it reaches the boss, so he is going to do his special attack. But honestly, it's not that difficult. You kinda just have to tap down and cross the beams with the right timing. Then we have the bomb phase, which is my least favorite. But thankfully the boss was low on health, so we just skip most of the phase, and after a bit more spiraling around the boss, we defeat him, opening the path to the real boss, Oryx the Mad God, which, in case you didn't notice, is the name in the title of the game. So yeah, he's basically the final boss. During the whole fight, Oryx will run towards us with many different attacks he chooses from somewhat randomly, and he will gradually get stronger throughout the fight. There's also 3 towers that we have to destroy in order to deal damage to the boss, and they will regularly reactivate after a while, so we need to break them again every time. And before fighting him, let's quickly take a look at all of his attacks. First, he has a bunch of chase attacks that are pretty self-explanatory. He chases you with a lot of projectiles, and they deal a sizable amount of damage, which can quickly drop your health to 0. He also has a few attacks where he stands in place and throws a bunch of attacks towards us, 2 attacks where he rotates around the stage, which can be pretty dangerous if you're not prepared, but they are a good opportunity for us to deal some damage. He has 1 attack where he nukes the arena with a bunch of meteors, which instantly kills you if you step on them, so be careful. He has an attack where he leaves a bunch of lingering shots that weaken your character, which is very annoying and it can make the next phase a lot harder. He has 1 attack where he just throws a bunch of tomatoes, very good for us to deal damage, and 1 attack where he stands in place dropping sickening tomatoes. If we can get in, it's the best moment to deal damage to the boss, but if we get hit, we get sickened for a while, preventing us from healing, which can easily turn into disaster. He also has a special attack, but we'll talk about it when we get there. At the beginning of the fight, the boss does some pretty nasty attacks, so we just run away from him while hitting the towers on the way. After that, he goes back to the middle and does the sickening tomato attack, which is very easy to avoid when he's in the middle of the room, so that's a perfect opportunity to deal as much damage as possible. And if you deal enough damage to the boss in one phase, he will fall to the ground for a short while, allowing you to squeeze in a little bit of extra damage. Then he does Control, which is my least favorite phase because, as I said earlier, it leaves a lot of lingering projectiles that deals damage and weakens your character. So instead of trying to hit him, I use this downtime to break the tower that respawned. The boss then does a bunch of bad phases, but we try to squeeze in some damage at long range while running away. And he follows up with the tomato attack, which is pretty easy to dodge, so we can deal some nice damage to him. Feeling generous, Oryx decides to go back to the middle of the room and do its easy tomato attack again, so we deal a lot of damage here. And the next phase reminds us of a pretty important detail: the portals. During the whole fight, there will be a few rotating portals shooting a bunch of orange fireballs, and trust me, you do not want to be on their way. And even if you're careful, the combo of the boss and the portals can leave you in some tough situations, forcing you to tank a lot of damage. Anyway, let's return to our fight. After dealing a bit more damage, we push him to his next phase, where he's going to spawn a bunch of rotating eyes that heavily restricts the area we can walk in, making some easy attacks a lot more difficult to avoid, and the difficult attacks a lot more annoying. I managed to play pretty clean here though, so there's not much to talk about. We don't play aggressive on the dangerous patterns, and after slowly chipping some health whenever we can, we move on to the Exalted phase. Here, Oryx is going to evolve, and all of his attacks are going to be a lot more dangerous, with more damage and more projectiles to avoid. However, he decides to be generous again by doing the easiest attack possible, but the lingering shots from the previous attack weaken our character, greatly reducing our damage. Then we break the towers again while dodging the meteors, and after kinda messing up the easy tomato phase, we push Oryx down to 40% health, which triggers his special attack. And this attack may look a bit chaotic, but this is actually the easiest attack in the dungeon. The pattern is almost always the exact same, so you have a bunch of safe spots that pretty much guarantee you don't get killed. And the best part about this attack is that Oryx will fall down from exhaustion at the end of the phase, allowing us to take down a massive chunk of his health. And the boss now has a 15% chance to do this attack again at the end of every attack chain, which would be perfect for dealing damage safely. But it's only a 15% chance, so we probably shouldn't count on that. Oh. Okay. Well, I guess that's free damage. Alright, that was pretty lucky, but now we need to actually fight the real boss, because there's no way this happens 2 times in a row. What?! Okay, well, we got so lucky that we pushed the boss straight to its final phase, Heavens. During this phase, he can teleport straight on top of our character at the beginning of every attack, and lines of laser beams will regularly cross the whole arena, so with a bad combo of attacks, things can very quickly go wrong. And here, my strategy was simple, trying my best to survive until we get a bunch of good damage phases. But the boss doesn't seem to agree with that and gives me a bunch of very bad attack combos instead, forcing me to drink a bunch of healing potions. But after a while, we finally get a good damage phase, allowing us to squeeze in about 20,000 damage. And after almost stepping on a deadly meteor, Oryx teleports to my character with the sickening tomato attack, and he's positioned decently well, so we deal some great damage to him, but he barely survives, and I get hit by a sickening attack on my way out, so I started panicking a little bit. Oh no, 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 no. Please don't do a bad phase. Oh. Oh, he's dead. And that's it for the final boss of the game. But we still have 2 harder dungeons to deal with, so let's keep going. The next one on the list is the Shatters, which is widely considered to be the hardest dungeon in the game. But with all the practice we got from the Oryx Sanctuary, we should be able to breeze through this one in no time. Okay, we're back. In this dungeon, we're going to alternate between 3 clearing phases and 3 boss phases. The first clear phase is very tedious and boring, but basically we just roam around the map, killing every small mob on the way and breaking those little towers scattered all around the place. And after 17 minutes of doing that, we break the last tower, which opens up the portal to the first boss, the Bridge Sentinel. And this boss has 2 attack patterns and a special attack. The first attack is called Jumps, where he will repeatedly leap towards us while doing a big explosion of little blades, and as long as he doesn't sit on us, we should be fine. So we drag him around the stage while dealing some nice damage on the way. Then he goes to the middle and starts spawning a bunch of rotating knives. This is a lot more dangerous, because if the knives line up in the wrong way, it can quickly kill you. So instead of trying to dodge them, I just decided to back off to stay safe. Then the boss will start rotating really fast, and we have to keep track of where he goes, because if we stand on his way... yeah. And after dealing enough damage to the boss, we will have to destroy those little towers, which once broken will regularly summon a bunch of exploding slimes, so we have one more thing to take care of, because guess what? Those guys can one-shot you too. Anyway, we break the first tower while the boss moves on to the second phase, slashes. At first, he will stand in place on the top, and that's a perfect opportunity to deal a great amount of damage by just standing below him. However, I broke the worst tower possible, so the slimes prevented me from doing that, and I just had to back off. Then the boss will slowly rotate around the room, so we follow him around to deal some damage on the way. Normally, you're supposed to stay way closer to him to deal more damage, but last time I did that, it didn't turn out very well, so I just decided to play it safe. Then the sentinel goes to the top of the room and spawns a series of big falling knives. We're supposed to stay very close to the boss here too, but since I'm playing a ranged class, I can just abuse my range again to stay at a safer spot. And then the boss just randomly alternates between those two attacks until we break 3 towers. So we do just that, and naturally the fight is going to become more and more chaotic, since this is going to spawn more and more slimes. But the real hard part is when the boss does his rage phase, and here it's just complete chaos. The boss will alternate between following us with attacks and rotating very fast around the room, on top of tons of exploding slimes spawning and a swarm of blades coming out of nowhere. And after a few tough situations, literally all the slimes spawn at the same time, we end up doing the worst mistake possible, getting hit by the petrify. Thankfully though, the closest slime exploded just after we could move again, so we came out relatively unscathed. And after this terrific attack, the boss will just alternate again between its 2 previous phases until we finally knock him out. Okay, now it's time for the second clearing phase, and just like the previous one, it's so boring that it's not even really worth mentioning. So after 15 minutes of clearing mobs and bringing flames to the middle, we reach the second boss, the Twilight Archmage. And the convenient thing in this fight is that this boss never moves, so we can just aim at the middle and completely focus on dodging. We start with a few ice portal phases, which are nothing too bad. We just need to be careful to not get run over by the portals, and that's pretty much it. Then we get an annoying phase with a lot of bombs, so I just stay on the side and wait for the phase to end. And the Archmage follows up with a rotating attack where we have to weave in and out to avoid the bombs. It looks a bit scary, but with a bit of practice, it's not that bad. And after that, we dealt enough damage to be able to destroy our first crystal, and this will summon a bird. This bird is going to wander around the arena, and we will have to chase it down and kill it before being able to deal damage to the boss. Once the boss is vulnerable, the bird will start rotating around the boss and shooting fire attacks, which by itself isn't that bad, but when we destroy the second crystal, it will summon a second bird, and that's when it can get a little bit more annoying. But still, it was nothing too bad, and we quickly kill the birds again and push the boss to its final phase. Here we have both birds attacking us one last time. So we first deal with the Ice Bird by rotating around the arena with him, and snipe down the Fire Bird while avoiding the bombs. Then the Archmage does his finale attack, where we have to weave in and out of those spirals of flames, while baiting the boss to shoot his bombs in spots that are easy to avoid. And we quickly knock out the boss, and move on to the last clearing phase. Here we will have to destroy 5 tablets, while swarms of enemies will constantly spawn until we clear all of the tablets. And I've heard that a lot of people consider this to be one of the hardest parts to solo, and I don't agree. You kinda just have to shoot the tablets, try to kill the annoying mobs with your piercing shots, which Board is very good at doing, and if anything goes wrong, you can just drag all of the mobs around the arena while shooting at them to slowly kill all of them at once. And after carefully dealing with them, we break the last 2 tablets and open up the path to the final boss of the dungeon, the Forgotten King. And as weird as it may sound, our biggest enemy here is not really the boss, but the floor. And there's a lot of different floor patterns, so let's talk about them one by one as we get them. First, we get small grids, which is one of the easiest patterns, so we try to deal as much damage as possible by dragging the king around the middle of the room, because that's where we have the least amount of projectiles to dodge. A bit later, he does the absolute worst pattern, carousel. Here we have some massive walls of rotating bullets, heavily restricting our movements. And while we have to rotate with it, we also have to be very mindful of these crystals, because if you step on them... yeah. And on top of that, the boss will sometimes follow you around, preventing you from taking your time and forcing you to speed through these dangerous crystals. And after a pretty chaotic pattern where we slide between a big mass of projectiles while dragging the boss around, we get the Second Gardens. Here we will have to drag the boss around the room while avoiding the slows and the seconds, and if we take too much damage we will have to back off to wait for the second to disappear. It can be a bit dangerous, but it's a good opportunity to deal damage. After that we get 5 tentacles, and overall this one isn't too bad. We slowly drag the boss around and cross the gaps between the tentacles, but if you get slowed, it can get a bit tricky. Then we get small carousel, which is a lot easier than the big version. We kinda just dodge back and forth near the edge and move away whenever we see the boss. After that we get Second Gardens again, so we deal as much damage as we can, while literally not dodging anything. A bit later we get big carousel again, putting us in a pretty scary situation. Leave me alone, leave me alone! And then we have a phase that apparently a lot of people find easy, but I really don't like it. We kinda just have to chill at the edges and rotate around the room when the boss follows us, but having to rotate so close to the edge always scares me, so I end up taking a lot of damage. Then we get another Second Gardens. What the hell am I doing? And after getting some nice damage on another small grids, we get the chaotic phase again. But this time, since the boss is close to reaching the next phase, I decided to drag him around the blue crystal to try to deal enough damage. And it was a little bit scary, but it worked. Now the boss is going to transform into a massive skull that chases us all around the stage, and we will have to kill all of the eyes in order to finish the phase. The first drag can be a little bit dangerous, but once we start killing a few eyes, it becomes a lot easier, and we just have to stay patient and focus on not getting hit. And when we kill all of the eyes, the king will move on to his accursed state, with a bunch of brand new phases. He starts with Kneel, and that's a great phase to deal damage. We just drag him around the whole arena while shooting at him, and the only thing we have to be really careful of are those slowing shades, because if we get slowed, the boss would be able to catch up with us, and that would be pretty bad. Then he does a phase that a lot of people find very easy, but I've always struggled a bit with it. The strategy is pretty simple, we just rotate in a small circle while staying close to him, and normally it should allow you to avoid most of the projectiles, although it doesn't always work. Then he does Kneel again, allowing us to deal some great damage, but after that we're going to have the hardest phase in the entire dungeon, Patience. In this phase we will be sickened for 30 seconds in an absolute apocalypse of projectiles. The only goal here is to survive, but since we can't heal, we will have to play really clean. And there's not much else to say about this phase, it's all about dodging, so I'll just leave you with it. Alright, that wasn't too bad. The king then decides to follow up with another Kneel, where I didn't play very clean, but I still got some nice damage in, and he follows up with one of my least favorite attacks, Reflectors. Here we're supposed to rotate with the boss to deal a lot of damage and to avoid the shades, but something went wrong in my brain and I kinda messed it up, so I ended up just camping on one side and dodging the shades instead. Then we get Abyss again, and this one doesn't go as well as the previous one. And finally, the boss finishes with the Guitar Hero phase, but he's so low on health that we quickly shoot him down, and we beat him. Alright, now we only have one more dungeon to deal with, the Void. And under normal circumstances, it's not particularly hard, but the problem is that this dungeon was specifically designed to be played with a group of at least 4 people, so it can quickly get very overwhelming when you're alone. But soloing the Shatters made me improve a lot at the game, so I'm pretty confident this one is not going to take too long. Hey, the year is 2024. I started this challenge in December 2022. Since then, a lot of things happened in the world. This very game I'm currently playing received multiple major updates, Geometry Dash 2.2 was released after 7 years without an update, and we even got the official trailer for GTA 6. If we continue like that, the Switch 2 will be announced before I finish this challenge, so it's time to get this to an end. The final obstacle is the Void, and if we want a chance at beating it, we really need to have the best equipment we can possibly get. So I made a brand new bard with the Crucible for the loot bonus, and started grinding. Okay, not gonna lie, that's probably the best character I ever made, so let's get done with the Void. In order to find the portal to the Void though, we're first going to have to clear the Lost Holes, but honestly, compared to the Void, it's very easy, so there's really not much to worry about here. Okay, I guess I underestimated this boss, but thankfully I still had a bunch of equipment in my chest, so we can go back right away. The boss that guards the portal to the Void is the Marble Colossus, and the fight is pretty straightforward. We cycle around the room with the boss while breaking the towers on the way, then we have to do the same thing again but shooting at the keys this time. And after breaking the Colossus down to 10% health, he does his survival attack, which is the only really difficult one. Here, we're going to have to dodge a plethora of projectiles, all of them debuffing you to some extent, while shooting the keys that rotate around the room at the same time. So after surviving to the best of our ability, we break the last key and move on to the last phase. And here, the boss will basically do the same attacks as before, with a different color and with more damage. So we just carefully drag him around the room, and after defeating him, we can finally move on to the Void. And here, unlike the rest of the dungeons, we're really going to need an actual strategy. So let's take a look at how the fight works. Throughout the fight, the boss will regularly summon a bunch of small creatures, and if you leave them be for too long, they will become big boys, making them very aggressive and much more dangerous. The arena will also get split twice during the run, and once we're stuck in a little quarter, we can't chase down the small creatures in the other platforms anymore, which creates a time-ticking bomb, leading to an overwhelming swarm of creatures we just can't deal with. Thankfully though, we can predict when the creatures will spawn and when the platforms will split, so we can plan accordingly. And if something really goes wrong, we have some emergency ghost rooms, which can temporarily make us invisible at the cost of blurring the screen. So first, we're going to eat all of this Christmas food to increase our damage, and the beginning of the fight is the best moment to deal a lot of damage. So we rotate around with the boss while making sure to swap between our two abilities to keep both buffs active and deal as much damage as we can until the arena splits in half. Then we're going to completely ignore the boss and just focus on clearing all of the small creatures that spawn on both sides of the arena before they become big. and we'll just keep doing that over and over again until the boss goes to the middle. Here we deal as much damage as we can, but we make sure to stop shooting before he reaches 120,000 health, because that's when he will split the arena in 4. Then we go back to clearing mobs again, completely ignoring the boss, until he goes back to the middle for a second time. And here we swap to our invisibility ring so we don't get targeted by the small creatures, and deal as much damage as we possibly can, because the boss will not split the arena until the end of the phase, allowing us to bring him all the way down to 85,000 health. Then we quickly run to the other side to clear all of the remaining creatures before the arena splits again, and now that's when the time-ticking bomb starts, but since we prepared the arena accordingly, we should have enough time to push him to his next phase before things get too bad. We snipe him on his way for another 13k damage, and after surviving for a little bit, he goes back to the middle, so we pop our invisibility again and completely demolish him, pushing him to his next phase. And this transition phase is pretty hard because a lot of big boys will spawn while the boss also shoots towards us, so we carefully drag the big boys in a small circle while popping a few ghost drums, and after a little bit we move on to the next phase. Here the boss will split into 4 copies that rotate around the room, and we have to kill all of them one by one, while also taking care of the big boys that spawn in. This is mostly a test of patience. If you just stay focused and don't greed, you should be fine. But when I was analyzing other people's runs, I noticed that the spawn timing of the big boys coincide with the 4th copy, making them struggle a lot to kill it. So as soon as I killed my 3rd copy, I rotated to another platform so I can finish off the last copy before the big boys spawn again. And now we move on to the final attack, where the boss will shoot a bunch of fireballs towards us while more big boys will spawn in, and I made an accidental discovery here. Apparently, when you're invisible on this phase, the boss will just stand there and do nothing. So we rush in to deal the final damage, and we beat the void. And that's it. After 2 years, I finally finished this stupid challenge. I cleared every Exaltation dungeon solo, and I can finally claim my special skin. But I don't play the game anymore, so I probably won't use it. But I'm still happy that I did this, and most importantly, my friends can finally stop making fun of me.